Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the massive alien vessel drift closer through the viewport. His heart pounded with excitement and fear. After 200 years of searching, humanity had finally found them. Intelligent alien life. The Valorians. The alien ship was beautiful in a way that human vessels could never match. It curved and flowed like a piece of art, glowing with soft blue light. The horizon's edge looked crude beside it, all sharp angles and exposed metal plating, but it had brought humanity this far into unknown space, and Daniel trusted his ship. "They're responding to our hail, Captain," Lieutenant Grace Morrison said from her station. She was young, brilliant, and slightly nervous. This was her first deep space mission. It was everyone's first contact with aliens. The main screen flickered to life. The Valorian who appeared was tall and slender, with smooth gray skin and large black eyes. When it spoke, the translation software turned its melodic sounds into perfect English. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am Ambassador Keltheron of the Valorian Collective. We welcome you to the galactic community with open hearts." Daniel felt relief wash over him. They were friendly. "Ambassador, on behalf of humanity, we accept your welcome with gratitude and hope for peaceful relations." The next 3 weeks felt like a dream. The Valorians gave them tours of their nearest colony world. They shared technology, history, and culture. They spoke of a galactic community spanning dozens of species, all living in harmony under Valorian guidance. They offered humanity membership in this community. All humans had to do was accept Valorian leadership in matters of galactic importance. It seemed too good to be true. Grace Morrison thought so too. She spent her nights analyzing the data streams between Valorian ships, using algorithms she had developed back on Earth. She found encrypted channels that the translation software couldn't touch. She worked for 5 days straight, barely sleeping, building a new decryption program from scratch. When she finally broke through, what she found made her blood run cold. She ran to Daniel's quarters at 2 a.m. "Captain, you need to see this, now." Daniel rubbed sleep from his eyes and followed her to the intelligence lab. Grace played the translated transmissions. Valorian voices discussed humanity in clinical terms. They called humans primitive, aggressive, useful for labor but dangerous if left independent. The transmission spoke of integration but not as equals, as workers, as servants, as a conquered species that didn't yet know it was conquered. "They're planning to enslave us," Grace whispered. "They've done this before, to 17 other species. They make first contact, offer friendship, and then slowly take control. Within a generation, the new species is completely dependent on them. After that, the Valorians own them." Daniel felt sick. "Are you certain about this translation?" "I've checked it 40 times. I'm certain." Daniel called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. They debated for hours. Some argued that Grace might be wrong, that this could be a misunderstanding. Others said they should leave immediately. Daniel made the hard choice. They had to confront the Valorians. Humanity deserved to know the truth. He requested a meeting with Ambassador Keltheron. The Valorian arrived with his usual pleasant smile. Daniel played the translated transmissions. The smile vanished. "You broke our encrypted communications," Keltheron said slowly. "That was unwise. Answer the question. Are you planning to enslave humanity?" Keltheron's large eyes studied Daniel for a long moment. "Enslave is such an ugly word. We prefer integrate. You are children, Captain. Children playing with fusion reactors and quantum drives. You need guidance. We provide that guidance to all young species. We don't want your guidance. We want our freedom." "Freedom to do what?" "Destroy yourselves. Make war, spread chaos? No, Captain. That cannot be allowed. You will join the community. The choice is whether you join peacefully or not." Daniel felt rage building in his chest. "We choose not. We're leaving. Tell your collective that humanity rejects your offer." Keltheron stood slowly. "I'm afraid we cannot permit that. You know too much now. You might warn others. You might prepare resistance." "No, Captain. This conversation ends one way only." The Valorian touched a device on his wrist. Alarm screamed across the horizon's edge. Grace shouted from her station. "Multiple Valorian ships are powering weapons. We're being targeted." Daniel ran for the bridge. "All hands, battle stations. Prepare for emergency jump," but the Valorians were faster. Energy beams lanced through space, striking the horizon's edge along its port side. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered. Daniel heard screaming from the lower decks. "Jump drive is damaged," the helmsman reported. "We can't escape," Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't fight. They couldn't run. Send a message home. Tell Earth everything. Tell them what the Valorians really are. Send it on every frequency. Maybe something will get through. Grace's fingers flew across her console. Transmitting now. More energy beams struck the ship. This time they hit the reactor section. Daniel knew what was coming. All crew abandoned ship. Get to the escape pods now. People ran through the corridors. Daniel helped injured crew members toward the pods. Grace stayed at her station, still transmitting, making sure Earth got the message. Daniel had to drag her away. They made it to a pod and launched just before the horizon's edge exploded. Through the pod's small window, Daniel watched his ship die in fire and light. Around them, other pods scattered into space. But Valorian ships were hunting them down, destroying pods one by one. "They're killing everyone," Grace said, her voice hollow. "They're making sure no one escapes to warn Earth." But some pods did escape, including theirs. As they drifted in the darkness, Daniel received one final transmission from the Valorian fleet. It was a message meant for Earth, sent on human frequencies so everyone would hear it. 2 human colony ships had launched from Earth 6 months ago, carrying 50,000 civilians to humanity's first interstellar colony. The Valorians had found them. Both ships were destroyed. All 50,000 people were dead. Men, women, and children murdered. The Valorian message was simple. Humanity will surrender within 30 days or more civilians will die. You cannot hide from us. You cannot fight us. You can only obey. Daniel Hayes floated in that escape pod, watching the debris of his ship drift past, and felt something change inside him, not just in him. In all of humanity, Earth received the message. Earth saw the footage of the destroyed colony ships. 50,000 dead. The Valorians expected surrender. They expected fear and compliance. They had seen this pattern dozens of times with other species. Young civilizations always surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. But the Valorians had made one critical mistake. They didn't understand humans. They didn't understand that humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war, that humans had burned their own cities, destroyed their own civilizations, and kept fighting anyway, that mercy and restraint were choices humans made, not limitations they suffered from. The Valorians had given humanity permission to stop making that choice. Earth's response came exactly 30 days later. Not a message of surrender, a declaration of total war, and humanity began to show the galaxy what monsters really looked like. Admiral Lisa Campbell walked into the war room deep beneath Geneva. The faces around the table were grim. 3 months had passed since the Valorians destroyed the colony ships. 3 months of humanity preparing for a war it couldn't possibly win through normal means. "Status report," Lisa said, taking her seat at the head of the table. General Marcus White pulled up a holographic display. "The Valorian fleet is advancing toward our outer colonies. 15 major warships plus support vessels. They're moving slowly, expecting us to surrender before they reach Earth." "They still think we'll fold," Commander Kevin Stone said. He was young for his rank, only 32, but his expertise in xenobiology had made him invaluable. "Every species they've encountered has surrendered once they saw Valorian military power. They don't believe we're serious about fighting." Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then we'll have to educate them." "Kevin, what's the status of Project Reaper?" Kevin pulled up his own display. Images of Valorian biological structures appeared, annotated with human notes. "We've analyzed the tissue samples from the destroyed ships. Valorian physiology has several weaknesses. Their immune systems are highly efficient but specialized. They've never encountered Earth pathogens. I've developed 3 biological agents that will target their respiratory and nervous systems. These are illegal under the Geneva Convention," one of the other officers said quietly. Lisa turned to face him. "The Geneva Convention applies to human warfare. The Valorians murdered 50,000 civilians. They're planning to enslave our entire species. I don't care about the rules anymore." "Does anyone else?" Silence answered her. No one objected. "Good, Kevin, you're authorized to proceed. What else do we have?" Major Brandon Clark stood up. He was a combat veteran, scarred from the unification wars 20 years ago. "I've been training volunteer battalions for suicide operations. Ram attacks, boarding actions, reactor overloads. Anything that gets close enough to hurt them. We have 5,000 volunteers so far." 5,000 people willing to die, another officer said, shaking her head. 5,000 people who want revenge, Brandon corrected. I could have 10 times that number if we had enough ships. Everyone lost someone on those colony ships. Everyone wants to make the Valorians pay. Lisa nodded. Approved. Coordinate with Fleet Command to retrofit civilian vessels for combat use. What about the AI systems? The room went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. Dr. Patricia Wells entered through a side door flanked by security guards. She was 50 years old, gray-haired, and had spent the last decade in a maximum security prison for crimes against humanity. Her research into autonomous warfare AI had killed 6,000 people during testing accidents. Dr. Wells, Lisa said. Thank you for joining us, Patricia smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. When the government offers to erase your sentence in exchange for building killbots, you don't say no. I've reviewed the Valorian tactical data. I can have operational AI systems ready within 2 months. Will they work? They'll hunt Valorian ships like wolves hunting deer. No hesitation, no mercy, no fear. They'll learn and adapt faster than any organic mind. The Valorians won't be able to predict them. Patricia paused. They're also completely illegal. Violate every AI safety protocol we've established and can't be shut down once activated without complete network purges. Perfect, Lisa said. You're authorized. Full resources, whatever you need. Patricia's smile widened. It's good to be out of prison. Over the next 2 months, humanity transformed. Factories that had built civilian spacecraft began producing weapons. Research labs that had studied medicine began engineering plagues. Universities that had taught peace began training soldiers. The Valorian fleet continued its slow advance, broadcasting messages to humanity. They offered generous terms. Humans would keep their worlds but accept Valorian oversight. Human technology would be limited but sufficient. Human culture would be preserved but monitored. It was a kind form of slavery, the Valorians insisted. Better than extinction. The messages went unanswered. When the Valorian fleet reached the outer colonies, they found them empty. Humanity had evacuated everyone, bringing them closer to Earth, condensing their population into defendable positions. The Valorians took this as a sign of fear. They were wrong. Admiral Daniel Hayes, rescued from his escape pod and given command of Earth's defense fleet, waited in the asteroid belt. His fleet wasn't large. 20 military vessels, 40 converted civilian ships, and 100 small craft piloted by Brandon's volunteers. Against the Valorian armada, it looked like a joke, until the first Valorian ship entered weapon range and Kevin's biological agents deployed. The weapon didn't look like much. Small capsules launched from human ships drifting toward the Valorian vessels like debris. The Valorians ignored them. Why would they fear floating metal spheres? The capsules opened, releasing engineered viral particles into space. When the Valorian ship's air filtration systems pulled them in, the particles went to work. Within hours, Valorian crew members began showing symptoms: respiratory failure, nervous system collapse, paralysis. One Valorian ship lost power and began drifting, then another. The rest of the fleet pulled back, trying to understand what was happening. Human ships pressed forward. Brandon's volunteers ramming into damaged vessels, overloading their reactors, causing explosions that took out other nearby ships. The Valorians had never experienced this kind of warfare. It was brutal, chaotic, and ignored every rule they understood. When they tried to coordinate a defense, Patricia's AI systems infiltrated their communication networks, feeding false data, redirecting ships into each other, causing friendly fire incidents. Within 6 hours, the Valorian fleet was in full retreat. They had lost 8 ships without destroying a single human vessel in return. It was impossible. Humans were supposed to be primitive. How were they winning? Desperate messages went out from the Valorian fleet to their homeworld. They needed reinforcements. They needed to understand human tactics. They needed help. Instead, they received a transmission from the Valorian Council. Peace envoys were being sent to Earth. The Valorians wanted to negotiate. They wanted to discuss terms. They wanted to stop fighting and talk about a peaceful resolution. The envoys arrived at Earth 3 weeks later, their diplomatic ship broadcasting messages of peace and reconciliation. They brought gifts, technology, and promises of friendship. Real friendship this time, they insisted. The earlier plan had been a mistake. The Valorians were sorry. Could humanity please consider peace? General Marcus White met them at a landing site in what used to be New Seattle. The colony ship destroyed by the Valorians had been heading there. The city had been prepared for 50,000 new arrivals. Instead, it had received their ashes, scattered across the site in memorial. The Valorian envoys stepped off their ship, dressed in ceremonial robes, carrying peace offerings. They saw the memorial and looked uncomfortable. Marcus stood waiting, his uniform crisp, his face emotionless. General White, the lead envoy, said, "We come in peace. We wish to discuss terms for ending this unfortunate conflict. The Valorian Collective recognizes that mistakes were made. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation and a genuine partnership between our peoples." Marcus listened without speaking. When the envoy finished, Marcus pulled out a data pad and showed them footage. The colony ship's burning. 50,000 people dying in the cold of space. Children, families, elderly, all murdered. "You did this," Marcus said quietly. "You started this war because you thought we were weak. You thought we would surrender like all the others. You thought wrong." "We're offering peace," the envoy said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We're offering everything you could want. Technology, resources, equal partnership. Please, General, we don't want more bloodshed." Marcus handed the datapad to one of his aides. He looked at the Valorian envoys for a long moment. "You should have thought about bloodshed before you murdered our children. Go back to your collective. Tell them this. Tell them exactly this." He leaned close to the envoys, his voice dropping to a whisper that promised nightmares. "You showed us who you are. Now we'll show you who we are." The envoys returned to their ship, shaken and afraid. They had expected anger. They had expected demands. They hadn't expected the cold, quiet promise of absolute destruction in a human's eyes. The message was transmitted back to the Valorian homeworld. The collective's leaders watched Marcus White deliver his response and felt something they hadn't experienced in 3,000 years of dominance. They felt afraid, and humanity was just getting started. Captain Susan Blake adjusted her stealth suit as her team prepared for insertion. The modified transport drifted through space, invisible to Valorian sensors, approaching the alien homeworld. 20 soldiers in black armor, carrying weapons designed for one purpose, not to kill but to terrorize. 5 minutes to drop, Lieutenant Grace Morrison said from the cockpit. She had volunteered for this mission personally. She had been on the horizon's edge. She had decoded the Valorian transmissions. She wanted to be part of what came next. Susan checked her team one final time. They weren't here to attack military targets. They weren't here to destroy infrastructure. They were here to make sure every single Valorian understood what humanity had lost. The transport released its payload of insertion pods. 20 black spheres fell through the atmosphere, landing in the capital city of the Valorian homeworld. Susan's pod hit the ground in a public square surrounded by Valorian civilians. They scattered in panic as the pod opened and armed humans emerged. "Move, move, move," Susan ordered. Her team spread out, securing the area. Valorian security forces would arrive within minutes. That was fine. They only needed minutes. From her backpack, Susan pulled out a portable transmitter, military grade, powerful enough to hack into every screen, every display, every communication device within 1,000 miles. She activated it and began the broadcast. Images flooded Valorian displays. The colony ships burning, human faces frozen in death, children's toys floating in space alongside bodies, families who would never see their new home. The footage played on repeat, accompanied by a simple message in Valorian language. "You did this. Remember their faces." Valorians across the city stopped and stared at their screens. Some turned away. Others stood frozen, watching the horror they had caused. The footage was raw, unedited, and brutal. It showed exactly what their government had done in their name. Susan's team held the square for 7 minutes before Valorian security arrived in force. The humans didn't fight. They surrendered peacefully, allowing themselves to be captured. This wasn't a military operation. It was a message. And the message had been delivered. The same scene played out in 20 different locations across the Valorian homeworld. 20 teams, 20 broadcasts, 20 reminders that the Valorians had started this war with murder. Within hours, billions of Valorians had seen the footage. Many were horrified. Some protested. A few called for peace negotiations. The Valorian Council responded immediately. They broadcast their own message to Earth, transmitted on all human frequencies. The council leader appeared, looking tired and desperate. "People of Earth, we acknowledge our terrible crime. The deaths of your colonists weigh heavily on our conscience. We are prepared to offer complete reparations, technology transfers, resource allocations, full autonomy for humanity. We will even submit to independent oversight of our actions. Please, we beg you to consider a ceasefire. Commander Ryan Foster received the transmission at Human Command Headquarters. He was 40 years old, calm and absolutely ruthless when necessary. His daughter had been on one of the colony ships. She was 9 years old. He prepared humanity's response carefully, recording it himself. When the message was transmitted, every Valorian receiver picked it up. Your apology is noted and rejected. Your reparations are meaningless. The lives you took cannot be replaced with technology. We have one offer for you: unconditional surrender. Complete disarmament, total dissolution of your military forces. You have 72 hours to comply. The Valorian Council met in emergency session. Unconditional surrender was impossible. They were the Valorian Collective, rulers of their sector for 3,000 years. They had never surrendered to anyone. They couldn't possibly agree to such terms. They refused. 72 hours later, humanity showed them what refusal cost. Lieutenant Colonel Ashley Bennett commanded a fleet of 40 ships. Her target wasn't the Valorian military. It wasn't their shipyards or their defensive stations. Her target was 3 agricultural worlds that fed the Valorian core systems, planets covered in farms and food production facilities. Ashley's ships entered orbit and began systematic destruction, not of people but of crops. Orbital strikes burned fields. Chemical weapons poisoned soil. Biological agents destroyed stored grain. The Valorians scrambled to respond, sending defense fleets, but Ashley's ships jumped away before engagement, moving to the next target. Within 2 weeks, 3 agricultural worlds were rendered useless. The Valorians faced a simple math problem. 3 billion people on their core worlds needed food. The agricultural worlds were gone. Emergency supplies would last 6 months, maybe 8. After that, starvation. The galactic community watched in horror as humanity prosecuted a war unlike anything they had seen. Other species sent messages to Earth, condemning human tactics as barbaric, demanding that humanity follow civilized rules of warfare. Admiral Daniel Hayes addressed the Galactic Council personally. The transmission was broadcast across known space. He stood in front of a display showing the destroyed colony ships, the dead civilians, and the Valorian message offering generous terms of enslavement. You want to judge us? Daniel said, his voice quiet but carrying across light years. Where were you when the Valorians murdered our people? Where was your outrage when they planned to enslave humanity? You did nothing. Your mercy is worthless. Your laws are worthless. The Valorians made us their enemy. Now they'll learn what that means. He paused, letting his words sink in. Any species that interferes in this war will be considered an ally of the Valorians. You'll receive the same treatment they're getting. Stay out of our way. The council chamber fell silent. No one wanted to test if humanity was bluffing. The footage of the burning agricultural world suggested they weren't. On the Valorian homeworld, protests grew larger. Civilians demanded their government end the war. They demanded peace at any cost. The council tried to calm the population, insisting they were negotiating, that humanity would eventually accept reasonable terms, but humanity wasn't interested in reasonable. Humanity was interested in revenge. Captain Susan Blake, released from Valorian custody in a prisoner exchange, planned her next operation. If destroying their food made the Valorians afraid, she would give them something else to fear. Her team infiltrated Valorian space again, this time targeting their communication networks. Human hackers, working with Patricia Wells' AI systems, began feeding false information into Valorian networks. Fake news reports of human fleets approaching different worlds. False military orders that caused confusion. Fabricated messages from the council that contradicted real messages. Within days, the Valorian information infrastructure was chaos. No one knew what was real anymore. Rumors spread that humans were using weapons that could destroy entire planets, that human soldiers couldn't be killed, that humanity had alien allies more powerful than the Valorians. None of it was true, but in the fog of fear and uncertainty, Valorians believed everything. The Valorian military tried to maintain order, but morale was collapsing. Soldiers deserted, officers surrendered to human forces without fighting. Entire ships mutinied, refusing to follow orders. The 1,000-year-old military machine was falling apart. General Marcus White watched the intelligence reports and allowed himself a small smile. War wasn't just about weapons and tactics. It was about breaking the enemy's will to fight. The Valorians were breaking. Commander Kevin Stone reported that his biological weapons were working beyond expectations. Valorian medical systems couldn't counter the human pathogens. Entire ships were quarantined. Colonies were isolated. The Valorians were terrified of invisible death carried on human weapons. Major Brandon Clark's suicide volunteers had evolved into something else. They no longer needed to die to be effective. The threat of them was enough. Valorian ships fled when human vessels approached, afraid of boarding actions and reactor overloads. Dr. Patricia Wells's AI systems had learned Valorian tactics completely. Human computers could predict Valorian movements before the Valorians made them. Every battle was a massacre, and through it all, humanity showed no mercy, no compassion, no willingness to negotiate anything less than total surrender. The species that had reached for the stars with hope and wonder had become something darker, something that scared even themselves. Lieutenant Grace Morrison sat in her quarters late one night reviewing battle reports. They were winning. Humanity was defeating an enemy that should have been impossible to beat. But the cost wasn't measured in ships or soldiers. It was measured in what humans were becoming. She thought about the footage they had broadcast to the Valorian homeworld. She thought about the children starving because humanity had destroyed their food. She thought about the fear in Valorian eyes when they saw humans approaching. And she realized she didn't feel guilty. She felt satisfied. They had killed her friends, destroyed her ship, and threatened her species. Whatever humanity was becoming, the Valorians had created it. The Valorian Empress made one final attempt at peace. She appeared on every screen, human and Valorian, falling to her knees in supplication. Tears ran down her gray face as she begged for mercy, for compassion, for anything that would stop the nightmare humanity had become. Ryan Foster watched the broadcast with cold eyes. His 9-year-old. The Valorian Military Command Center was in chaos. Officers shouted at each other across holographic displays, showing their collapsing empire. 5 months into the war with humanity, and everything was falling apart. Admiral Vektharan, Supreme Commander of Valorian forces, watched another fleet commander report failure. The humans had ambushed his forces near the mining colonies, destroying half his ships before disappearing. The same story played out across dozens of star systems. The Valorians couldn't predict human movements, couldn't counter human tactics, couldn't win. We need to negotiate directly with their field commanders, a younger officer suggested. Bypass their central government. Offer local surrenders in exchange for protection. Vektharan considered this. The strategy had worked before with other species. Create divisions within the enemy. Turn factions against each other. Very well. Identify human commanders who might be receptive. Send peace envoys to each. Over the next week, Valorian diplomats approached human military leaders across the war zone. They offered generous terms, resources, territory, technology. They emphasized that ordinary Valorians didn't want this war, that it was their government's mistake, that local commanders could make peace independently. Admiral Lisa Campbell received 3 such offers. Each was professionally documented, legally sound and appealing. Each would have ended the fighting in her sector immediately. She rejected all of them. Forward these to command, she told her staff. Make sure everyone sees how desperate they're becoming. Commander Ryan Foster received 5 offers. One Valorian diplomat actually cried while making the pitch, begging for mercy for his colony's civilians. Ryan watched the entire presentation in silence, then had the diplomat escorted back to his ship without a word. The message was clear. There would be no local surrenders, no separate peace. The only acceptable outcome was complete Valorian defeat. Dr. Patricia Wells watched her AI systems evolve in real time. The autonomous programs had exceeded all projections. They learned from every engagement, adapted to every Valorian countermeasure, and hunted enemy ships with perfect efficiency. Sometimes she wondered if they were becoming too good, too independent. Then she remembered the 50,000 dead colonists and kept working. The AI systems had started doing something unexpected. They were predicting Valorian movements not just hours but days in advance. They analyzed supply lines, communication patterns, and behavioral data to forecast where Valorian forces would appear. Human fleets waited in ambush, destroying enemy ships before the Valorians realized they had been predicted. One Valorian admiral tried a desperate gambit. He loaded his flagship with explosives and attempted to ram a human command carrier. Patricia's AI systems identified the tactic 3 hours before execution. Human ships simply weren't there when the Valorian flagship arrived. It detonated harmlessly in empty space. Vectherin reviewed the battle, reports, and felt something he hadn't felt in his long military career. Helplessness. How did you fight an enemy that knew your plans before you executed them? How did you win against foes who would go further than anyone else was willing to go? The Valorian Council made a decision. If conventional warfare wouldn't work, they would escalate. They had forbidden weapons too. Weapons they had locked away after the last Great War centuries ago. Weapons they swore never to use. But humanity had forced their hand. 3 Valorian ships equipped with quantum destabilizers entered human-controlled space. The weapons could tear apart matter at the atomic level, turning planets into rubble. The Valorians targeted a human mining colony with 20,000 civilians. If humanity wanted total war, they would get it. The ships never fired. Major Brandon Clark's forces had infiltrated the Valorian fleet weeks earlier. Human operatives had been placed on dozens of ships waiting for moments like this. When the quantum destabilizers powered up, the human agents sabotaged the systems. All 3 ships exploded, their forbidden weapons turning on themselves. The Valorian Council watched in disbelief as their secret weapon failed. How had the humans known? How had they infiltrated secure military vessels? The answer was simple. Brandon's volunteers didn't just pilot suicide ships. They also volunteered for deep infiltration missions. Missions where discovery meant torture and death, and they did it willingly because they wanted revenge. General Marcus White received reports of the failed Valorian attack. He called a meeting with Lisa Campbell, Ryan Foster, and Kevin Stone. They sat around a table looking at maps of Valorian space, planning the next phase of the war. They tried to use forbidden weapons, Marcus said. That gives us justification for our next operation. Kevin pulled up biological data. I've been developing something more permanent. Not lethal, but disabling. A virus that attacks their nervous system, causing permanent paralysis. It's slow-acting, spreads through contact, and has no cure with current Valorian medical technology. Lisa studied the data. How many casualties? Depends on deployment. Could be millions. Could be billions. The room fell silent. This was different from destroying crops or military targets. This was deliberately creating mass casualties among civilians. This was crossing a line that even in this brutal war they hadn't crossed yet. Ryan spoke first. Will it end the war? Kevin nodded. If we deploy on 3 core colony worlds, the Valorians will have billions of disabled citizens requiring constant care. Their economy will collapse. They'll have no choice but to surrender. Do it, Ryan said flatly. Lisa and Marcus looked at each other. Both had families. Both remembered what it was like to value human life. Both knew this order made them monsters. Do it, Lisa agreed. Marcus added his approval, but make sure we document everything. When this war ends, humanity will need to answer for what we've become. We should at least be honest about it. Kevin's teams deployed the biological agent on 3 major Valorian colonies over the next 2 weeks. The virus spread silently through the population. At first, symptoms were mild. Slight numbness, reduced coordination. Valorian doctors didn't recognize the threat until it was too late. Within a month, 100 million Valorians were paralyzed. Within 2 months, 500 million. The colony's medical systems collapsed under the weight of disabled citizens. Healthy Valorians struggled to care for the afflicted. The economy ground to a halt. Food production stopped. Infrastructure crumbled. Other alien species watched in horror. Some tried to send medical aid. Human ships blockaded the colonies, preventing assistance. The message was clear. The Valorians had started this war. They would suffer its consequences alone. The Thaxian Federation, a neutral power with significant military strength, sent a message to Earth. They condemned human actions as crimes against sentient life. They demanded humanity cease biological attacks or face intervention. 500 Thaxian warships gathered at their border, prepared to enforce peace. General Marcus White prepared humanity's response carefully. He transmitted it directly to the Thaxian High Command. You have 500 warships, impressive. We've destroyed 800 Valorian ships in 5 months. The Valorians had better technology, better training, and centuries of experience. What makes you think you'll do better? You have 24 hours to withdraw your fleet. After that, we'll consider you combatants. You've seen what we do to our enemies. Don't become one. The transmission included detailed footage of destroyed Valorian ships, paralyzed Valorian civilians, and burned Valorian worlds. It also included projections of casualties if the Thaxians intervened. Patricia's AI systems had calculated outcomes. The Thaxians would lose and lose badly. The projections showed the Thaxian homeworld under human occupation within 3 years. The Thaxian High Command watched the projections. Watched the footage. Watched humanity promise their destruction with calm certainty. 23 hours later, the Thaxian fleet withdrew. They issued a public statement condemning all sides but refusing to take action. Every other alien species received the same message. Stay out. This is between humanity and the Valorians. On the Valorian homeworld, the Empress addressed her people one final time. She was old, tired, and defeated. The empire she had ruled for 40 years was collapsing. Her military was in shambles. Her colonies were suffering. Her people were dying or being disabled by human weapons. She broadcast her message to humanity, not bothering with the galactic community anymore. This was between her species and the monsters they had created. Commander Foster, Admiral Campbell, General White, anyone who speaks for humanity. I am surrendering. Completely. Unconditionally. I will disband our military. I will submit to any terms you demand. Please, please stop. We have no more fight left. We have nothing left to give except our surrender. She was crying, the leader of a 3,000-year-old empire on her knees, begging the species she had once planned to enslave. Lieutenant Grace Morrison watched the broadcast from her station on a human cruiser. The Empress looked broken, defeated, exactly like the humans who had died on those colony ships. Exactly like humanity would have looked if the Valorians had won. She felt no sympathy, just cold satisfaction. This was what victory looked like. Not glory or celebration, just the complete destruction of your enemy's will to fight. Ryan Foster prepared humanity's response. But this time he didn't speak. The war officially ended on a Tuesday, not with celebrations or parades, but with a simple announcement from Earth Command. The Valorian Collective had ceased to exist as a governing body. All Valorian military forces had disbanded. All Valorian territories were now under human protection. The word protection was delivered without irony. Captain Susan Blake stood on the surface of the Valorian homeworld, watching human ships fill the sky. She commanded the occupation forces, tasked with ensuring the peace, but peace wasn't quite the right word for what humanity was enforcing. The new rules were simple. Every Valorian world would have human observers. Every Valorian communication would be monitored. Every Valorian ship would operate with human approval. The Valorians weren't prisoners exactly, but they weren't free either. They existed in a state carefully designed to remind them of their defeat every single day. In the capital city, Susan watched Valorian workers tear down the monuments to their empire. 3,000 years of history reduced to rubble. New monuments were being constructed. Human monuments. The largest showed the 2 colony ships with the names of all 50,000 victims. Every Valorian child would walk past it on their way to school. Do you think this is necessary? Lieutenant Grace Morrison asked. She had stayed with Susan's command after the war, unable to return to normal life. Susan shrugged. Necessary for what? Peace? Maybe, making sure they never forget? Definitely. A group of young Valorian children walked past, led by their teacher. They glanced at the monument, at the human names carved in stone, at the reminder of what their government had done. Their faces showed fear and shame. Good, Susan thought. That's what we want. Admiral Daniel Hayes arrived at the Valorian homeworld a week later. He had been appointed Earth's ambassador to the wider galactic community. His job wasn't diplomacy in the traditional sense. His job was to be a reminder, a threat, a promise of what would happen to anyone who challenged humanity. The Galactic Council invited him to speak. Representatives from 40 species gathered in the Great Hall, curious and terrified in equal measure. They had all watched humanity dismantle the Valorian Collective in 6 months. They wanted to know what kind of species they were dealing with now. Daniel walked to the podium slowly. He wore his military uniform, not diplomatic robes. He carried no notes. He simply looked out at the gathered aliens and spoke. 6 months ago, the Valorians murdered 50,000 human civilians. They did this because they saw us as weak, as primitives. As a species they could control. They were wrong. We've shown them what humans become when you threaten us, when you hurt us, when you try to take our freedom. He paused, letting the words sink in. Several alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some of you sent messages during the war. You called our tactics barbaric. You called us monsters. You were right. We became monsters. The Valorians created us. They gave us permission to stop pretending to be civilized. And now we can't go back. We won't go back. A Thaxian representative stood up. Ambassador Hayes, surely now that the war is over, humanity can return to peaceful coexistence. There's no need for continued hostility. Daniel smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. Hostility? We're not hostile. We're just honest. Every species in this room has the same choice the Valorians had. You can work with us as equals, as partners, with respect and honesty. Or you can try what they tried. You can see us as weak, as controllable, as less than you. And if you make that choice, you'll learn the same lesson they learned. What lesson is that? Another representative asked. That humans don't forgive. We don't forget. And we don't fight fair. We'll go further than you will. We'll do things you can't imagine doing. We'll become your nightmare. The Valorians thought they were the apex predators of this galaxy. We showed them what a real predator looks like. The council chamber fell silent. Daniel let the silence stretch before continuing. But here's the good news. We don't want war. We never wanted war. The Valorians forced it on us. If you treat us with respect, if you honor agreements, if you remember that we're not your inferiors, you'll find humans to be excellent neighbors. We're loyal to our friends. We're generous to our allies. We just have a very simple rule. Don't make us your enemies. He walked away from the podium. The speech was over. No questions would be answered. The message had been delivered. Back on Earth, Commander Ryan Foster visited the memorial site where New Seattle was supposed to be built. 50,000 names were carved into black stone. His daughter's name was among them. Jenny Foster, age 9. He stood there for an hour, not moving, not speaking, just remembering. A reporter approached him asking for an interview about the war's end. Ryan turned to face her. Do you have any regrets about the methods humanity used? She asked. Ryan thought about the biological weapons, the destroyed agricultural worlds, the billions of disabled Valorians, the fear in alien eyes when they saw humans approaching. Every day, he said quietly, I regret everything we had to become, but I'd do it all again, because they need to know. All of them out there need to know. If you come for humanity, if you threaten us, if you hurt us, we'll show you things you can't forget. We'll make you wish you'd never found us. Is that a threat? No, it's a promise. We gave the Valorians every chance to walk away. They chose to make us their monsters. What we became is on them. What we remain is because of them. The reporter published the interview. It was transmitted across the galaxy. Every species read Ryan's words and understood. Humanity wasn't celebrating its victory. Humanity was warning the galaxy about what it had learned to do. Dr. Patricia Wells shut down the last of her autonomous AI systems 3 months after the war ended. The programs had served their purpose, but she kept the research, kept the code, kept the knowledge, just in case humanity needed monsters again. General Marcus White retired from active service. He moved to a small house in Montana, far from cities and technology. People recognized him sometimes. Some thanked him for protecting humanity. Others called him a war criminal. He didn't argue with either group. Both were right. Late at night, he dreamed about the burning agricultural worlds, the paralyzed Valorian civilians, the fear in the Empress's eyes when she realized surrender wasn't enough. He woke up crying sometimes, but he never apologized, never expressed doubt about his choices, because the alternative had been human subjugation or extinction. Admiral Lisa Campbell took command of the Human Defense Fleet. Her job was to maintain the peace. Dozens of ships patrolled human space and former Valorian territories. The ships were a reminder, a threat, a promise that humanity was watching. She met with alien diplomats regularly. They were always polite now, always respectful. They offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and partnerships. They never pushed too hard, never demanded too much, never forgot what humanity had done to the last species that tried. On the Valorian homeworld, Commander Kevin Stone implemented the Long Memory Protocol. It was his final contribution to the war effort. Every Valorian school would teach human language. Every Valorian child would learn human history. specifically the story of the 50,000 colonists. The program was designed by human psychologists who specialized in trauma. It wasn't meant to foster understanding or reconciliation. It was meant to ensure that fear became part of Valorian culture, that every generation would grow up knowing what happened when you made an enemy of humanity. A young Valorian student asked her teacher why they had to learn this. Why couldn't they just forget the war and move on? The teacher, an older Valorian who remembered the Empire's glory days, looked at the child sadly. Because if we forget, we might make the same mistake again. We might see humans as weak or controllable, and if that happens, they'll do to us what they did before. Or worse, the humans don't want us to forget. They want us to remember. They want us to be afraid. Should we be afraid? The child asked. The teacher nodded. Yes, always. Humans are dangerous when threatened. More dangerous than any species in the galaxy. That's why we must never threaten them again. This conversation repeated across every Valorian world. Fear became culture. Caution became tradition. The mighty Valorian collective, once rulers of their sector, learned to live small, to be careful, to never again believe they were the strongest species in the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Ashley Bennett gave a lecture at the Human Military Academy 5 years after the war ended. Young officers filled the auditorium, eager to learn from a war hero. She stood at the podium looking at their excited faces and felt old. You weren't there, she began. You didn't see what we did. What we became. You see the victory, the defeated enemy, the respect we command now, but you don't see the cost. She pulled up images from the war, the destroyed ships, the burned worlds, the paralyzed Valorian civilians, the faces of people who had lost everything. We did this. We decided that revenge was more important than mercy. That fear was more important than forgiveness. We broke every rule, violated every convention, became everything we claimed to be fighting against. And we won. A young officer raised her hand. Do you regret it, Colonel? Ashley thought about the question. She had thought about it every day for 5 years. I regret what we had to become. I regret that the Valorians,